Hi, this is Les Posen, clinical psychologist, flight-wise fear of flying. Welcome. It's the end of May 2019. About a month ago, I recorded what I think is an important video for many of you called Why Am I Getting Worse the More Often I Fly? And it was my attempt to answer an important question, and that is one of practice. How is it that given I'm on a plane more often than in the past, how is it that I'm not getting better at my fear of flying? And my answer to that was, well, you're getting better at something, so practice does make things better. Trouble is, you're getting better at switching on earlier to lesser and lesser signals and causing yourself to have more and more upset on board the plane, which then leads itself to more and more anticipation of being upset earlier and earlier until you get to a state of anxiety where you're looking for reasons why I shouldn't fly or can't fly or there's a better way to do things than flying. Of course, sooner or later you come up against a bit of a wall, which is you've got to be at a certain place at a certain time. Hopefully for a happy occasion, a son's wedding, a daughter's graduation, a parent's 90th birthday. Sometimes it's for not such a happy occasion. You've just got to be there and there will be no other chance to go because something important is about to happen and you better be there. And many people sit for years with that kind of rather negative idea in the back of their brains spinning around and really causing a great deal of unpleasantness. So today I want to, in this short video, extend the why am I getting worse the more often I fly, and suggest that with some other ways to deliberately practice how to get better at this, you can start to make a shift from getting better at getting worse when you fly to getting better at flying. And it's about what you're going to practice. So let's start. One of the first things I ask patients when they come to see me for the first time, we've had a phone call or there's been an email or some reaching out to say, I've got some troubles with this flying. By the way, it's not just flying. It could be driving, going over bridges, going through tunnels, public speaking. There's a variety of things. They all have in common the sensation that, something really bad is going to happen to me when I go into that situation. And so I must spend a lot of time spinning my wheels in fear of these situations. So one of the things I ask is not so much what do you think caused this fear. We'll get to that later on. Or some other, or who's around to help you out, or sometimes a useful question might be, what have you tried so far? These are bad questions, and you want to get to them eventually, but where I like to start is, how do you know when you've become anxious? What are, to start at the top, what are the sensations you're experiencing that maybe someone else wouldn't see you experiencing it? We could perhaps measure it, hook you up into various equipment and measure it. What are the sensations you're experiencing? Follow along. Some of the common ones are, my heart seems to skip a bit. It starts to race. I break out in a sweat. I get hot flushes or I get cold and clammy. I get butterflies in the stomach. It's a particularly Australian or British way of thinking, but more Americans start to use this expression, or I just feel nauseous. I get a choky sensation. I get really dry in the throat. Now, I get people to focus on sensations. Some people will just jump in and say, I can't think straight, or I feel really nervous. But we've got to try and break that down. I'm asking you, when you contemplate your feared situations, which has caused you to either avoid or use medication or use a drug, alcohol, whatever it might be, to try and reduce those sensations, what are the sensations you're focusing on? Because they have to be a target of some of the work you want to do. What are those sensations? So make a little list for yourself of what those sensations are. Okay? All of them are going to be a sensation due to your internal threat response system switching on to some perceived threat. That threat could come from the outside. I've got to fly next week to Los Angeles, to Auckland, if you're in Australia, to Sydney, or from Sydney, whichever it might be. And or I'm going to experience certain unpleasant, uncomfortable, potentially embarrassing situations, which I'm going to have to somehow contain or minimize by my behaviors. Okay? So from sensations, we go to behaviors. I'm leaving out feeling states. I feel this We're going to leave that out because those things are really hard to change off the bat. Sensations we can work with and behaviors we can work with very directly. Feelings come afterwards. Okay? Feelings are almost the evaluation of how am I doing here. So we're going to leave feelings out for a while. Don't try and change feelings straight away. Sensations first. What are the behaviors? Oh, I clench the side of the plane, of the chairs on the plane. I start to doodle. I put my headphones on and I try and block out the sounds. These are all behaviors. They've got a sensory aspect to it. I try to block out sounds. I try and minimize my body shaking. So they've got sensations attached, but I'm much more interested in what are the behaviors that you're doing in order to try and reduce your discomfort. That's what these behaviors are doing. They're trying to reduce your discomfort either by doing an alternative behavior that somehow you've discovered is kind of helpful, or they distract you from your sensations which are uncomfortable and unpalatable. I knit, I draw, I talk to the person next to me, I grip the person next to me. All of which in their own way have utility and purpose, but in the long haul, in the long scheme of things, they actually contribute to you getting worse the more you fly, not better, because they're not teaching you how to manage yourself. They're teaching you to distract, and they're teaching you to shut down, and they're not really teaching you how to manage yourself. Okay? So what have we got so far? We have sensations, we have automatic behaviors. When I say automatic behaviors, you don't have to think too much about them. They just come bang. You don't have to go to school to learn them. They just happen. Grip the seats, gasp in air, whatever it might be. They're automatic. The next automatic process that we need to talk about are your thoughts. And in previous videos, I've talked about self-talk, what you say to yourself. Usually it's simply something like, oh my God, here we go. I knew this would happen. This is terrible. And we tend to finish off there rather than putting a comma and then all brackets and opening up. This is going to be terrible because I can't stand this for the next 8 hours. This would be terrible because how embarrassing it would be to have to get up and go to the restroom when I really don't want to because I'm feeling so ill. So you always want to finish off that self-talk with, well, what are the implications? What would happen if you did cry? What would happen if you did have a panicky episode on board? So rather than just labeling them as the terrible, most awful things ever, what are the implications if you experience this? You've got to follow it through. Are you actually going to die if you experience this? Will you be permanently harmed? Will you truly lose that job? So you really want to ask yourself, what are the implications? Then don't just accept them as being unpleasant and that's it. The challenge with all anxiety type behaviors when it comes to the point where you've got to seek some professional help is that in general, anxiety tends to get labeled as 0, that is it's not present, or 10. It's overwhelming. 0, 10. There's nothing in between. And in psychological treatments, what we are trying to help people do is say that there's a scale between 0 and 10. And the better you are at being able to label where I am and give it an appropriate label. We call this affect labeling. Labeling what you're experiencing. I'm feeling really tense. My heart is racing. I think I've broken out in a sweat. And giving it a number. This is about a 5 on my scale of 10. Now, that numbering is called subjective unit of distress scale, SUDS. It's been around for like 40, 50 years now. Personally, I like to match up SUDS with some sort of objective measure, such as skin response, such as heart rate. More lately, I've been looking at, lately being 15 years, I've been looking at something called heart rate variability, which looks at the pattern of heart rate, just to see how well you're able to contain that very strong arousal, or to build up the ability to recover and become more resilient after the presence of a very strong set of sensations. Let me give you the way to think about this. Imagine you're an Olympic athlete. It's the semi-finals of the 100-meter sprint. Your resting heart rate is only 40, but as the starter calls, gentlemen, ladies, take your marks, everyone's heart rate goes up to 100, 120, so that when you're out of those blocks, set, bang, off you go. Your heart's probably going to max out at 140, 140, 150 on the blocks, and then max out at 220 at 9.7 seconds when the race is run. But let's just imagine that the race caller says, ladies and gentlemen, sorry, there's been a mistake. The timing is off. We're going to have to run this race again. We're going to do this in 20 minutes. The question happens, in that 20 minutes, do you want to stay up at 220 heart rate, or do you want to come back down to 40? Most people smartly will say, I want to come back down at 40, because spinning your wheels at 220 for the next 20 minutes means you'll be exhausted. It's like on board a plane for 12 hours. Once you have your first upset, you don't want to stay upset for the next 12 hours. You want to be able to go into recovery. So part of that heart rate variability that I'm talking to you about is your ability to quickly recover and go back into low levels of arousal. We call this in the trade homeostasis, being able to recover. Okay? And so some of the techniques I teach in my one-on-one work with people is how to quickly to recover by using their breathing and how we measure it. So let's go back. What are your sensations? What are your behaviours? And what are your thoughts? Okay? Which of your behaviours are actually making things worse? Gripping the seats, avoiding listening, they're going to make it worse because they temporarily have you believe that you're coping, but in fact you're not. What are your thoughts? Are you saying to yourself, oh my God, as soon as I walk on board, I'm trapped? Being trapped is what happened to those young soccer players in Thailand in the caves with the water going up and really quite little chance of being saved, even by professional divers. The fact that they were is just one for the books. But that's what being trapped is. Walking onto a plane is not being trapped. When you say to yourself, oh my God, I'm trapped on a plane, you will only encourage your threat response system to kick in and then encourage you to do behaviours to try and undo that sense of entrapment, and they'll actually only, in the long run, make it worse. Okay? So what we've got to do is practice managing our sensations. And this is all predicated on two things. And this is inference testing. This is testing probabilities. And people make errors that I'm going to look at with them in two ways. One, what is the probability of some event happening when I go into a certain scenario which will cause harm, injury, or death? How am I estimating that probability? Am I just taking it for granted because I've watched air crash investigation every week and now in my mind I've built up the chances of something happening to me way out of proportion? So that's number one. That's an overestimation that danger will be present if I go into this scenario, or even just think about it, because just thinking about it produces all these yucky sensations. That leads to number two inference, which is an underestimation. Are you underestimating your ability to cope with these yucky sensations? It would be very unpleasant if my heart was to race on board a plane, but is it the end of the world? Am I actually making it worse by predicting I won't be able to cope with this? Okay? So that's underestimation of your ability to cope. You add to that underestimation when you divide up anxiety and arousal and all the yucky sensations from 0 and 10, there's nothing in between. When you start to label it properly, you start to tweak your ability to estimate correctly. And the reason is that you're using a part of the brain right at the very front, the newest part of our brains, which have developed much later and which are almost unique to human beings, some would say, where we do reasoning and planning. And when you start to label what you're experiencing, put a number on it, you're actually using those parts of the brain which are going to push down against the older parts of the brain, which are quick and dirty and make very quick assumptions, but often get it wrong. So your ability to be able to push back down against these things using your thinking is going to be really important because of all this stuff coming up, which is going to try and overwhelm your frontal lobe, because let's get the heck out of here. Why? Because these fear response systems developed when we human beings were not the strongest on the planet. We didn't have big teeth like my hairy friend who was just over there before. We didn't have much language available to us to work as a bonded group. We didn't have spears. We were really quite vulnerable. So for us, fear would often instigate a running away or an escape or a hiding reaction or a freeze on the spot reaction. Fight was there, but it came along a little bit later, I think. Now we work together as a social group to try and make things happen and defend ourselves. And that's one of the gifts of our frontal lobes, to be able to have language so we can communicate with each other. Your task is to communicate to yourself about what the right thing is to do in a given situation. So my strong suggestion is have a look through the flight envelope from the time you book your flight, from the time the night before when you getting your stuff together, from the time of the morning or the afternoon when you head out to the airport to when you arrive. Divide up the flight into its various components and ask yourself, historically speaking, what am I likely to experience in all of those places? What are the sensations? What are the behaviours? And what's my self-talk? Let's not worry about the feelings. There's simply an overarching description of what all this is. But we don't want to try and change feelings first. You want to try and change or modulate, as we call it, sensations, challenge some of the thinking, and change some of your behaviours by introducing newer ways to handle the same situation, because the older ones have not worked very well.